Antibiotic resistance affects all countries in the world, but without a reliable, comprehensive system to collect data, it's impossible to get a real global overview of the situation. So let's focus on one particular region, the Middle East. In its hospital in Amman in Jordan, MSF treats casualties from Iraq and Syria and has observed that around 50% of its patients suffer from a multi-drug resistant germ infection. Why? The context first. Population displacements caused by conflict foster the propagation of bacteria. Moreover, the destruction of hospitals and poor hygiene result in the wounded being treated in unsanitary environments. But it also stems from a more global phenomenon: antibiotics being overprescribed by doctors, being available off the shelf in stores, and being misused by patients. How does antibiotic resistance come about? Bacteria become resistant either from a random genetic mutation or because they get wise to an antibiotic with repeated exposure and thereby learn to fend it off. To understand how resistance spreads, let's take a closer look at this bacteria sample, which is similar to what can be found in our bodies. Some bacteria are good, but others make us ill, and some of these may already be resistant. When an antibiotic is introduced, most of the bacteria disappear, including the good bacteria, which are there to help our bodies defend themselves. So only the resistant ones remain, and they are free to multiply. Worse still, they can transmit the information to other bacteria, showing them how to become resistant. This can lead to severe health problems that can be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to treat. What can be done? There are no new antibiotics on the horizon, and anyway, waiting for new drugs to come out onto the market isn't an option, as the whole process will simply happen all over again. Preventing resistance calls for attacking the root causes. Firstly, the behavioural causes, making people aware of the need to use antibiotics with moderation, and better informing health workers to avoid inappropriate or over-prescription. But we must go even further and address the health system itself. Regulating the sale of antibiotics and setting up solid surveillance networks are essential. If we don't, we may as well just forget many of today's antibiotics.
Antibiotic resistance is a global concern. More bacteria are becoming resistant to multiple antibiotics. Common infections such as of the gut, urinary and respiratory tract are becoming difficult or sometimes impossible to treat. Infection with resistant bacteria may lead to prolonged recovery, increased length of hospital stay, more deaths, higher cost of treatment, and greater spread of infection and resistance. The problem is that no new class of antibiotics has been developed since the 1980s, and the health community is worried that the antibacterial drug pipeline is near empty, and the achieved gains of modern medicine are at brink. For example, treatment options such as cancer chemotherapy, organ transplantation, and post-surgery outcomes would fail or have turned into high-risk procedures because of failing antibiotics. In the US, an estimated 2 million people are infected with antibiotic-resistant bacteria every year, leading to about 21,000 deaths annually. Imagine the scale of damage in India, where infections are common, waste management is poor, and antibiotics are used indiscriminately. WHO says a post-antibiotic era is a real possibility for the 21st century. And most of this is happening because of overuse and misuse of antibiotics in humans and animals. So how do bacteria become resistant to antibiotics? The resistance can be both natural and acquired. Some bacteria are naturally resistant to certain types of antibiotics, while immunity towards antibiotics can also be acquired through genetic mutation and horizontal gene transfer. Genetic mutation is a spontaneous change in the DNA of the bacteria, which helps it overcome the mitigating effect of the antibiotic. However, a common way in which bacteria acquires resistance is through the transfer of resistant genes to another one in its proximity. This is horizontal gene transfer. Use of antibiotics in humans and animals puts selective pressure. a process where non-resistant bacteria slowly die off, leaving only the resistant bacteria to flourish, identical to the theory of survival of the fittest. And there are numerous pathways for these to reach human beings. Let us look at the poultry industry to see how humans are exposed to these antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Poultry farmers feed low dosages of antibiotics to chicken throughout their growth cycle. Therefore, the gut of a chicken is not just a reservoir of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, but also of unused antibiotics. Humans are exposed to both of these through the meat that we eat and the feces and farm waste that are released into the environment. There is another category of people, like the meat handlers and cooks, who are susceptible to such exposures. This continuous interplay between antibiotics and bacteria in food, soil, water, and sewage leads to more resistance buildup, much like a chain reaction. And this chain reaction is happening every second, and more bacteria are becoming resistant. At this rate, antibiotic resistance is expected to become the biggest nightmare for healthcare providers in the 21st century.
Did you know that antibiotic resistance is one of the biggest threats to global health, food security, and development? You have probably heard of antibiotic resistance before, but most people don't realize that it's actually the bacteria that become resistant to the antibiotics, not humans or animals. But what is antibiotic resistance, and why is it so dangerous? First, we need to know what antibiotics are, so you may want to watch this video first. Antibiotics are a type of medicine that are used to treat and prevent bacterial infections by inhibiting certain metabolic or chemical processes which occur inside the bacteria. They only work on bacterial infections and are very important for public health. Antibiotic resistance happens when antibiotics cannot interrupt the bacteria's life cycle successfully anymore, and so bacterial infections become harder and harder to treat. When you take a dose of antibiotics, there will be some bacteria in the population that remain unaffected by the treatment because of their genes. These bacteria are said to be resistant. The antibiotics cannot kill them. These resistant bacteria then reproduce, passing their resistance onto their offspring. Whole new populations of bacteria are created that are unaffected by antibiotics, meaning there are bacterial infections and diseases which cannot be treated by antibiotics. This is where the problem lies. It becomes very difficult to treat infections caused by antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Alternative treatments are often less effective and more expensive. So who is being affected by this antibiotic-resistant bacteria? It's a global threat. It affects anyone of any age in any country. Without urgent action, the world could be headed for a post-antibiotic era, which common infections and minor injuries which have been treatable for decades can once again kill. And the amazing benefits of advanced modern medical treatments, such as chemotherapy and major surgery, will be lost. In some aspects, we'll be rewinding medicine by 100 years. So why has this happened, and why is it spreading? Resistant bacteria would naturally evolve anyway. Survival of the fittest means the resistant bacteria survive and reproduce, but the spread has been sped up by our misuse of antibiotics. The current global antibiotic resistance crisis is the result of 6 factors. Have a look at these 6 factors. Number 1. If antibiotics are wrongly prescribed for viral infections or for weak infections that the individual could naturally fight off without medication, bacteria are then being exposed unnecessarily to antibiotics, and so the dreaded resistance ones evolve and breed. Number 2. Don't expect antibiotics to help you if you have a cold or the flu. They are viral. Even if you feel better, you must finish your full course. The full course kills off as many bacteria as possible. Number 3. Antibiotics aren't just in humans. Since 2006, the EU has banned antibiotics use to promote growth or prevent infections in healthy animals. Some other countries have also followed suit, but many more haven't yet. They need to. But all is not lost. Together, we can reduce the impact of the spreading antibiotic resistance. We need to all understand and appreciate that antibiotics are a precious resource that cannot be taken for granted. By changing how we produce, prescribe, and use antibiotics, we can limit the spread of antibiotic resistance. Everyone can play a part. Complete your full course and don't think antibiotics will cure everything. Careful prescription and educate your patients. Keep searching for new antibiotics and other alternatives, regulate the use and educate the public. Only use antibiotics on sick animals with a vet's prescription. So that is why people are concerned about antibiotic resistance. It makes the treatment of some diseases much more difficult, but we can all do our part and slow the spread.